Silksong still isn't out, and I am not coping very well. When I got started with Hollow Knight speedrunning, there were meme runs, sure, but they were short and reasonable runs. We had things like Zote%, where you'd go and kill Zote in the Hollow as quickly as you could, or Mr. Mushroom Ending, where you'd go and get the Mr. Mushroom Ending. We had Myla%, where you'd... Times were simple. Hollow Knight was relatively new, and Silksong had just been announced. Surely we'd have another game to play with soon, right? Right? Fast forward a couple of years, and things have gotten a little more desperate. Bored speedrunners, like myself, have been looking for ways to fill our time, and we've turned to increasingly deranged categories or challenge runs. These runs have ranged from the downright nonsensical to the ruthlessly challenging to the simply impractical, and a lot of them even have leaderboards. Now it's 2023, and Silksong is delayed once again. Is it time to finally give ourselves a break, put down Hollow Knight, and go play some more Tears of the Kingdom? Okay, maybe a little bit, but there's still a lot of things to do in Hollow Knight. I'm here to tell you about a new run called Weathered Mask%. Weathered Mask% is a punishingly long and surprisingly difficult category focused on a pretty simple goal: obtain the Weathered Mask journal entry. Now, if you're not too familiar with this entry, don't feel too bad. It's pretty obscure, even to veteran Hollow Knight players. It's found in the Land of Storms, an area that you can only access by doing every Pantheon with every binding. And that does include Pantheon 5. So what does that mean? There are 4 bindings that add extra challenges to the Pantheons, and I'll go through each of them in order. The easiest of these is probably the Nail binding. It cuts your total nail damage from 21 down to 13. It's basically taking away 2 nail upgrades. Next we have the Shell binding, and this one's a lot more difficult. It caps our total health at just 4 masks, which is less than we even start the game with. In the Pantheons where some bosses deal double damage, this can mean we can only take 2 total hits. The natural companion to the Shell binding is the Soul binding, and instead of limiting our total health, this one limits our total soul. This hurts us in 2 ways. It stops us from dealing burst damage because we can only cast a single spell, and it also stops us from healing up at the end of a fight, which really hurts our survivability. But last and probably worst is the Charm binding. The Charm binding stops you from equipping any charms at all. That might not sound too bad at first, but when you're without your Quick Focus or your Mark of Pride, or God forbid, Wayward Compass, you'll start to feel it pretty quickly. For us speedrunners, it means a huge drop in damage, with no Unbreakable Strength or Shaman Stone or Quick Slash. Now, each of these is a challenge on its own, but you can actually combine these, and when they're all on at once, whoo boy. With no charms, 40% less nail damage, almost no soul, you take an eternity to kill bosses. And on top of that, because you only have 4 health, you have to play super careful the whole time. Because of that, going through Pantheons with all bindings at once becomes quite a test of patience. But luckily we don't have to do them all at once for this run. The Weathered Mask entry unlocks even if you do the bindings just one at a time. Now, of course, that's a lot more tractable. But the problem is this is a speed run. And if I do them one at a time, that means I have to do every Pantheon 4 times over. That means I've got to decide how many to put on at once to limit the number of times through the Pantheons. But come on, Pantheon 5 with all binds? Don't be ridiculous. Alright, so you might have an idea of why the run is so hard, but it's also super long. This is because we actually do the run from a fresh file. So in addition to doing all the Pantheons, you've got to unlock them first. Essentially that means killing every single boss in the overworld before you go and fight him in the boss rush. Alright, so the run's gonna be super cursed. My goal at this point is to balance how long it's gonna take with how hard it's gonna be. By putting more bindings on at once in the Pantheons, it becomes a lot harder, but also a lot faster. The problem is Pantheon 5. If I die at the end of Pantheon 5 with all bindings on, that could mean an extra 45 minutes to an hour just to get back to where I was. Obviously, that comes with a bit of a risk. Beating every single boss in a row with all bindings on is one of the hardest challenges in Hollow Knight. Putting it at the end of a speed run, it's a little bit insane. Now, right before doing this run, I was able to complete P5 with all binds for the first time. But I was far from consistent, and I didn't trust myself to do it at the end of a 5+ hour run. So I decided to make a little bit of a compromise. I ended up doing Pantheon 5 twice with 2 bindings on each time. I paired up the nail and charm bindings in the first run and the soul and shell bindings in the second. Effectively, it broke P5 into 2 attempts, one where I get not a lot of damage but plenty of survivability, and one where I get the opposite. But for the first 4 Pantheons, I decided to go with the risky strat. I would do all bindings at once. For these Pantheons, even if you take a death, it's only 10 bosses total, so it's not as much of a risk as Pantheon 5. Plus, it just makes for good content, and as we'll see, these are far from easy. Alright, so I was feeling pretty decent about my decision. I mean, 2 runs through Pantheon 5, that's another 30 minutes or so to the run, but it's not all that bad in the end, right? Well, remember how we're doing this from a fresh file? That means that any upgrades I want to use in the Pantheons, I've got to go and pick up in the overworld first. What's the point of picking up charms if you have the charm binding, or of getting extra soul vessels or masks when they're just going to be limited anyway? But by breaking P5 into 2 runs, the only way I was going to get any real benefit out of it was if I picked up a bunch of those upgrades along the way. So that means I've signed myself up for a bunch of nail upgrades, and a bunch of masks, and a bunch of charms, and you can start to see how this run gets a lot longer. Now, luckily for me, the biggest time lost there is actually getting 31 grubs for the last pale ore, so it's really not that bad. Alright, so now you know about my bad decisions. Let's talk about the run. The run starts with the overworld portion, where my main goal is to kill every boss. But there's actually a couple of exceptions to that. We don't need to kill any dream bosses, for some reason we don't need to kill God Tamer in Hollow 3, and False Knight can actually be skipped. He appears in the Pantheons regardless of whether you kill him. Now, unfortunately, to get into Pantheon 5, you do need Void Heart, which means we end up killing a lot of the dream bosses anyway, but at least we don't have to hunt them all down. Most of this part of the run went pretty smoothly, with no major setbacks or deaths. I hate this, actually. Well, alright. Either we get this first try, or we die, and it's fine. Alright, that's fine. It took a couple of hours, but we made it to Godhome feeling pretty good. When you get into Godhome, the first couple of Pantheons are filled with some of the easier bosses, so even with all bindings on, I wasn't feeling too scared. The bindings begin, chat. So P1 all binds, I think shouldn't be hard. P2 all binds I think will be, and I'm kind of scared of it. But complicating things a bit was the fact that I didn't have any lifeblood unlocked. If you don't know about lifeblood in Pantheons, they're a bonus you can unlock by doing bindings. Once you finish 8 total bindings, then you unlock lifeblood cocoons at all the benches in the Pantheons. It starts with 3 lifeblood, but that number can go up to 5 once you've done 16 bindings. They're really one of the only lifelines you get in these all bindings challenges. An extra 3 or 5 health can go a long way when you have all binds. But because I'm playing from a fresh file, I wouldn't have this lifeblood unlocked until I finished all binds in Pantheons 1 and 2. Luckily, my P5 all binds practice really helped out here, and I got through most of these 2 Pantheons without too much trouble, even with all binds. Alright, so once I finish P1 and 2, things should go easy, right? I'd unlock the lifeblood, and P3 and 4 would be fine, right? Well, still, Pantheon 3 can be a little bit difficult, and let me tell you about another dumb decision I made. You see, one of the hardest bosses in Pantheon 3 is Grey Prince Zote. In fact, he's one of the hardest bosses in the entire game. Especially when you have on all binds, it can be extremely difficult. But the funny thing about Zote is he's actually optional. He's the only boss that won't appear in Pantheons if you don't fight him in the overworld. Now, of course, I'm doing a speedrun, and it's obviously faster to skip this boss, right? Yeah, it is. But I'm also doing a challenge run, and where's the challenge in skipping a boss like Zote?
I don't need GPZ, but like, come on. If you do Weathered Mask percent and don't do GPZ, you're like, come on. That's why are you even running the category?
So I went out of my way to fight GPZ in the overworld, which meant I had to fight him in Pantheon 3 and also in Pantheon 5. But I knew the Zote fight. I'm gonna die. Stop it. Zote, fuck you. Oh my god. Somehow though, miraculously, I was able to survive the fight and got out of there with 2 HP remaining. I finished out the rest of Pantheon 3 without too much trouble, even with all binds. And I went into P4 feeling okay. And of course with Pantheon 4, I got off to a great start. Yeah, fucking shit, dude. But the rest of the Pantheon went pretty smoothly. I got up to 4 lifeblood now from the halfway point, and I made it to the Pure Vessel fight feeling pretty good. Now, Pure Vessel is a boss I'm very confident in, and certainly wouldn't die to in the middle of a speedrun.
I've put back to Tramp. Are you gonna try to touch these notes up when we're done?
Dude? I just died to Pure Vessel. But when you only have 4 health and the boss deals 2 damage, things can go bad pretty quickly. Oh, fuck. Ah, no. Okay, we could die. Fuck, what? But somehow, again, I was able to recover, and we actually made it out of Pantheon 4 in one piece. So that was the first 4 Pantheons done with all bindings, and actually without a death. So maybe I could take Pantheon 5 with all binds after all. No. After how Pantheons 3 and 4 went, I was not about to change up my plan, and I went into the Pantheon of Halonest with 2 binds on at a time. The first run I did was with the Charm and Nail bindings. This meant I didn't have a ton of damage, but compared to the previous All Bindings runs, I had a ton of health and soul. After dealing with all those other Pantheons with All Bindings, this honestly felt like a breeze. I could take a bunch of extra hits and just heal up at the end of a fight. It certainly wasn't perfect, but even when I made mistakes, I was able to recover. In the end, I made it through Absrad with room to spare. So we finally made it to credits. But unfortunately for me, this is not the end of the run. I still had 2 more bindings to do. So I loaded back in and jumped right into Pantheon 5, this time with the Shell and Soul bindings. I was honestly a little bit worried about this run. It was back to low survivability, but I had a ton of extra damage now. I had a full damage nail and I could put on a bunch of charms. One charm in particular really helps out. When you have the Shell binding, you can actually still wear Unbreakable Heart, and instead of 4 total health, you'll be up to 6. That makes a huge difference, and it's a lot more survivability. As for the extra damage, when you've done 5 Pantheons in a row with no charms and a low damage nail, it feels fantastic to finally have these charms equipped. I started flying through these bosses. I didn't need to play it so safe anymore, and they just melted. This actually ended up being the easiest Pantheon run of them all, and it really wasn't particularly close. By the end of the run, I had so much lifeblood stacked up that it was almost running off the screen. In the end, we finished off Absrad with 5 lifeblood remaining. Honestly, I really should have tried it with all binds. So after one more short credit sequence, we had almost reached our goal. All we had left was to load back in and pick up the Weathered Mask entry. Now, if you haven't done this yourself, I'll try to give you the full experience. Once you've done all Pantheons with all bindings, a secret door opens up inside of Godhome. This door leads to the Land of Storms, an area that's beautiful, but you can only access it once. It's supposed to be the homeland of the Godseekers, and honestly, it's pretty depressing. If you do make it in, take your time and enjoy the sights, because you'll only get this chance once. To the right of the area, there will be a shiny pickup. That's the Weathered Mask entry. As soon as you grab it, you'll be kicked out of the Land of Storms, and the door will close behind you. But that's okay. We got what we came for, the Weathered Mask journal entry. Let me read it for you.
The Weathered Mask. A strange mask from a godless land passed down over time. The design suggests the wearer's thoughts were focused through the crest. Gods of thunder, gods of rain, why forsake thy servants? Will our minds be left suffering to ache alone? What god remains to deliver us from this woeful silence? The lament of the Godseekers. GG!
It took about 5 hours in the end, but my terrible, terrible run was done. I hope you've enjoyed this journey, and maybe even learned a thing or two. If you, like me, are looking for something to do before Silksong releases, maybe give this run a try. If you're on the lookout for even more deranged Hollow Knight content, rest assured, Silksong is not coming out soon, and what little self-respect I have will not stop me from doing more terrible runs. Until then, everyone,